Welcome to my channel, where the scariest stories come to life. Before we dive into today's chilling tale, make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications, so you never miss a story. Now, let's get into the horror. My house had always been my retreat. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine, a fresh chapter after leaving behind a marriage that had drained me. After long nights at work, it was my escape, where I could finally relax, shut out all the chaos of the day, and just breathe. This night, however, my sanctuary felt anything but safe. It had been another long shift, and I was beyond exhausted by the time I pulled into my driveway. I grabbed my bag, fished my keys out, and headed for the front door. When I slid my key into the lock, though, it didn't turn. At first, I thought to myself, I'm just tired. Maybe I'm using the wrong key or something. I tried again, jiggling it gently, then more forcefully. Nothing happened. Frustrated, I stepped back and looked at the door once more. Was the lock jammed? I didn't remember it sticking before. After a few more failed attempts and trying different keys, I gave up and called a locksmith. He arrived quickly and had a very friendly demeanor. He explained that the lock had likely just worn out. He replaced it with a shiny new one. "All right, shouldn't give you any trouble now," he said. At the time, it didn't seem like something to worry about. Sometimes things break, right? Life happens. Looking back, though, that moment was the first crack in what I thought had been an ordinary problem. Several nights later, I found myself in the exact same situation. It had been another late shift, and all I wanted was to go inside and collapse onto my bed. As I slid my key into the lock, though, it refused to budge. The new lock, the one that shouldn't have given me any trouble at all, was jammed. How could it fail so soon? Everything looked normal on the outside, but something didn't feel right. Reluctantly, I called a locksmith again. This time, it was a different guy, gruff and not nearly as chatty or friendly. As he worked, I asked if it was common for new locks to fail like this. He shrugged and muttered something about cheap materials, but I could tell he wasn't convinced. When he left, I double-checked every window and door in the house, making sure they were locked up tight. My mind kept wandering back to the door and the lock. Had someone tampered with it? By the time the weekend rolled around, the feeling of paranoia hadn't let up at all. That really wasn't like me. I was usually calm and logical, but the thought of someone tampering with my locks gnawed at me. On a whim, I decided to install a small security camera above the front door. It wasn't much, just a cheap model I picked up online. It gave me peace of mind. If someone really was messing with my door, I'd catch them in the act. For the first few nights, nothing happened. I'd come home, check the footage, and see only a cat or the empty porch. It was almost enough to make me feel silly for worrying. Almost. On the fourth night, everything changed. I came home from work, shoulders heavy from exhaustion, but this time, my key slid into the lock smoothly. For the first time in days, I felt a bit lighter. When I checked the camera footage later that evening, though, my heart dropped. At exactly 2:13 a.m., the screen showed a man in a hooded sweatshirt wandering onto my porch. He wasn't facing the camera, but his hands were working on the lock with practiced ease. My throat tightened as I watched him remove the cylinder. When he was done, he turned and entered the house like he owned the place. For the next 3 hours, the footage showed nothing but darkness. Then, at 5:26 a.m., the man reappeared. He exited the house, replaced the cylinder, looked around to see if anyone was there, and disappeared into the night. I stared at the screen, the weight of what I had just seen crashing down on me. He had been inside while I was gone for hours. My first instinct was to grab my phone and call the police, but I hesitated. What would I even say? That someone had broken in, but nothing was stolen? That I didn't know who he was or what he wanted? My hands trembled as I dialed anyway. The officer who arrived was kind. He watched the footage and asked me a string of questions. Did I recognize the man? Had I noticed anything missing? Had I seen any suspicious activity in the neighborhood? I replied no each time. Well, we'll file a report and increase patrols in the area, he said. In the meantime, I suggest staying with a friend or family member, at least until we figure this out. I took his advice. I packed a bag and drove to my sister's house. Sleep was impossible, though. My mind raced with questions, theories, and fears. Who was this guy? Why had he been in my house? The answers came the next day when the officer called me back. His tone was serious. They had accessed footage from neighborhood surveillance cameras. They saw the man getting out of a white vehicle 2 blocks away from my home. He was carrying tools and a small bag and walked directly toward my property without inspecting any others. A sinking feeling gripped my stomach as I listened. The footage gave them a clear view of the car's license plate, which they traced back to the registered owner. The officer paused before saying the man's name. I couldn't process it at first. It was my ex-husband, a man who had refused to accept our divorce, who clung to the belief that we were destined to be together despite everything. Fragments of old arguments and his obsessive behavior came flooding back. We believe he changed the locks as a way to manipulate your access to the house. It's not uncommon in cases like this. Hearing that he'd been so close, walking through my neighborhood and even inside my home, made me feel sick. The police assured me they'd taken him in for questioning and suggested I file for a restraining order. They also emphasized the importance of improving my home security immediately. I didn't hesitate. The next day, I had a professional security company install high-grade deadbolts, motion sensors, and cameras throughout the property. I changed my work shifts and informed my closest friends of what was happening. Despite the precautions, every corner of my home felt violated. Eventually, I moved to a new place altogether. I only shared my address with a select few, but the fear hasn't fully left me. The sight of a white car still makes my heart race, and I catch myself triple-checking locks, even in broad daylight. If I've learned one thing from all of this, it's that ignoring small, strange signs can have big consequences. Sometimes those small signs are the only warning you'll get. I used to live in a small town in North Texas, near the border of Oklahoma. This town had many old and rundown areas. When I was 20, I stayed in one of those neighborhoods in a worn-out apartment complex with my girlfriend. The place wasn't exactly in great shape, but it was all we could afford. At the time, the area was known for its crime rate, and people often talked about thefts and break-ins. It wasn't uncommon to hear police sirens at night or see shady activity out in the streets. However, I wasn't too concerned. Before this, I had lived in Oak Cliff, a part of downtown Dallas that had an even worse reputation. One night, I was off work and reading a book called Shogun in the living room. I had been reading for about 2 or 3 hours when I needed to use the restroom. I put the book down for a moment and got up to walk to the back of the apartment. The apartment had 2 rooms and a bathroom. As I reached the hallway entrance, I saw muddy shoe prints on the floor. The prints were facing the living room, right where I had been lying down reading. I instantly became alert and pressed myself against the wall, worried that someone might still be inside my apartment. My heart was racing as I carefully followed the muddy footprints down the hallway. They led all the way to my bedroom. The room was small, with just a bed, a dresser, and one window on the back wall. As I stepped inside, I noticed the footprints more clearly. They started at the window, went across my bed, and then returned to the same window. The window was slightly open, and the latch looked loose, as if someone had forced it open. My bedspread had smudges of mud all over it where the person must have stepped. That sight sent a chill down my spine. I stood there frozen, trying to figure out if the person was still nearby. I spent a long time searching through the apartment for any signs, but no matter where I looked, I couldn't find anyone. What scared me the most was that the only way in or out of the apartment was the front door in the living room where I had been lying down. The strangest part, and I know this might sound unbelievable, was the blanket I had covering my window. It was a large throw blanket, folded and pinned up to block the window completely. The window currently had the blanket perfectly in place, looking like it hadn't been touched at all. Someone had opened it to get in, though, so I know they must have climbed through that way. They must have carefully moved the blanket aside and stepped into the room, or taken it down and put it back up again. They walked through the apartment, down the hallway, and all the way to the living room where I was, just watching me read. It gave me chills to think about how long they may have been standing there watching me. How long ago had they left? I had no idea. The way I was lying, my back had been turned to the hallway, so I hadn't seen or heard anything. After that night, I couldn't sleep properly for weeks. I kept feeling like someone was watching me. My girlfriend was worried at first, but since she hadn't actually been there when it happened, she didn't fully understand why I was so scared. Eventually, she got frustrated with how afraid I was and suggested we just move to a new place. It took me a few years to get past it, but there are still moments when I catch myself wondering about what happened that day. Why didn't the person try to steal anything? Why didn't they come closer or do anything at all? Why did they just stand there watching me? Why did they bother to break in the first place? The thought of someone being able to get in so easily, like that, and leave without a trace or sound still creeps me out to this day. When I was around 14 or 15 years old, I was home alone one afternoon. My parents had taken my younger brother to a full-day event, leaving me behind. I was thrilled to have the whole house to myself. It felt like a small taste of independence, as I'd only been left home alone a handful of times before. Bored and restless, I found out one of my friends was having people over and decided to stop by. My parents had specifically told me not to leave the house while they were gone, but I didn't think it was a big deal at the time. Of course, I didn't listen. I grabbed my jacket, threw on my shoes, and headed out. Looking back, I can't believe how careless I was. I didn't even lock the door when I left, which seems like such an obvious thing to do now. I was just excited to see my friends, and locking up wasn't on my mind at all. I was out for a few hours, but when I came back, I immediately knew I'd messed up. Walking into the kitchen, I noticed all the cabinets were open. Items on the counters and table had been moved around. My stomach dropped as I called out, "Hello," hoping whoever had been inside was long gone. There was no response. I started checking the living room and kitchen for anything that might be missing. Just as I was about to head upstairs, the home phone rang. The caller ID showed an unknown number. I stared at the screen for a second, unsure whether to answer. Maybe it was just a telemarketer or a spam call. Against my better judgment, I picked it up. On the other end, all I heard was deep, heavy breathing. After a few seconds, I asked, "Who is this?" Right in the middle of my sentence, I was interrupted by a voice, "I'm in the house." My heart sank. I tried to play it off, hoping it was a prank. "No, you're not," I lied. "I'm here with my family." The voice responded instantly, "We both know that's a lie." Then the line went dead. At that exact moment, I heard the faint creak of footsteps upstairs. My blood ran cold as I called out again, but whoever was upstairs began running, heavy footsteps racing down the hallway toward the stairwell where I was standing. Panicked, I bolted through the back door and into the woods behind my house. I didn't stop running until I reached a neighbor's house. Shaking, I used their phone to call the police. When the police arrived, they found the front door wide open, just as I'd left it when I ran. They searched the house, but didn't find anyone. However, they told me it was clear someone had been there and likely intended to harm me. The intruder had gotten away. For years after that day, I refused to be left home alone. Even now, the memory of that voice and those footsteps haunts me. Thanks for sticking around till the end. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to give the video a like and leave a comment with your thoughts. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a terrifying tale. See you in the next one.